Hey, apologize for those technical difficulties a little bit earlier. Thanks for joining us once again. We made it to another weekend, and there's quite a bit going on in the crypto sphere. But before I get into any of that, I want to give huge shouts out to Donnie Glover, Donnie Glover Morning Show, Donnie Glover Show as well. You got to check out some of those past shows to see what Donnie's talking about. He's got some great new content, and looking forward to what's to come from him, as usual. Also, check out SistaBiz with Tamara and Nicole. They're always talking about great stuff in terms of what's going on business-wise in that local area of Baltimore. So also, be sure to check out the Black Business Roundtable with Art Blacksher. He's always got something great to talk about, and he's broadcasting here on the West Coast, live out of Oakland, every Thursday evening, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. So there's something I'm happy to announce with you guys, and that is my book, D5 for the Diaspora, is now available in hardcover. You can pick this up at my website, www.kamalarhubbard.com. Once again, there's been quite a bit going on in the crypto sphere. One of the stories that I thought was maybe one of the more important stories of this week is that minority communities are investing in crypto to escape financial discrimination. And if you want to learn more about that, you should pick up D5 for the Diaspora, because this is exactly what the book talks about. But a USA Today poll surveyed a number of Black, Hispanic, and members of the LGBTQIA plus communities to see their sentiments on cryptocurrencies. And of the highest responses came from the Black community. And what they see crypto as is a form of financial freedom, or really just overall general freedom, because many people in the Black community see traditional finance as not giving them a fair shake. So check that story out. I'm actually really interested in discussing this story a little bit more with my guests, who I'd like to bring in right now. And that is none other than Chris Bates. Hey, Chris, how you doing? Are you able to hear me okay?
Excellent. Thank you for having me on the show.
All right. Well, let me just give a quick intro in terms of who Chris is. Chris is a telecommunications and cybersecurity specialist. He received his bachelor's in psychology from Indiana University. He also has a master's in telecommunications with a focus on immersive mediated environments. During his first master's, he worked on creating digital algorithms that generated music with human interaction. He received another master's in cybersecurity from Colorado Technical University, and he is working on a doctorate in cybersecurity and information assurance from Colorado Technical, which she should be awarded next year. Currently, Chris is a research fellow at the Smart Contract Research Forum, which aims to bridge the gap between academia and professionals working in the blockchain and smart contract landscape. Chris, one of his main missions is to bridge the gap between technology and people in order to realize the economy of the future. Chris, welcome to BlackUSA Crypto News. I'm excited to speak with you today. And is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
Oh, no, thank you. I sincerely appreciate the forum and the warm welcome.
Well, you know what, Chris, obviously, your degrees speak for themselves. You're well-researched, well-read, well-spoken gentleman. And I just have to say you're one of the more informed people that I know in this industry as well. And so I'm happy to have you this evening.
Oh, I appreciate it. Yeah. And, I think part of that is all of those things you said are not wrong. And one of the things about being black is that you don't really get to be that person. America didn't, they didn't let me be this person. I broke through all of the walls to become this person. And I think that's where, you get the Steve Jobs and the Elon Musks, and those people are put in these places, and they have the narratives and they have the media. And that's what, there's an expectation of what that person is supposed to look like. And I'm trying to make sure that young black kids don't have to look up to fictional black scientists and black specialists. Like, these people exist beyond Marvel movies. They just don't get shown. And that's kind of one of the things I'm working on now is making sure that a lot of the African academics that are out there and people just don't know about them because they're not getting the same kind of shine. That's like one of my main focuses right now. So,
yeah, a common, I guess, or something that's reoccurring with this show is that how much more technologically, looking for the right word. It seems like a lot of African scholars are fully embracing blockchain. They are, fully invested into the research and learning more so than, Black Americans here, which I try to highlight that so that we can begin or at least taking a page out of their playbook. Not that we're not already, but just not enough of us are. I think we see more people who are trying to accumulate cryptocurrency and be rich, which, that's fine. But I think it also makes sense for us to also be creators of this technology, inventors of this technology, and understand it better just beyond how much Bitcoin you have.
Oh, 100%. And in that light, there are many things about the technology that have the potential to create surplus of capital. But I think when people get into anything, it doesn't matter what it is. If you get into something to make money and not put the money you made back into the thing you extracted the profit from, that's a zero or negative sum game. And I think ultimately when people look at something and they're like, I see financial freedom, well, what kind of financial freedom do you mean? Because on the one hand, there is a financial freedom in getting into a decentralized money market, but on the other hand, this space has been defined for over 10 years. People rushing in aren't gonna. Some people may get lucky and get an outsized return on investment, but most of the time, people are gonna break even or lose. So, if they're thinking like, oh, I'm gonna get into Bitcoin and get financial freedom where I don't have to go to my job, that's not gonna happen. And the way that it's being marketed is scary to me for a few reasons. So you can build a pyramid scheme around anything. It don't matter if it's a financial tool. It doesn't matter if it's a toy. It doesn't matter if it's it doesn't have to be digital, in the sense of like when people make fun of pet rocks, it's like, well, you can build hype and you can build a fad around anything. So don't make fun of the people who bought pet rocks because they just they fell into peer pressure that doesn't currently exist around buying. Well, not to say, because you have the geode and crystal market, it's the same thing. It's just fancier rocks. So we have this notion of like, let me say it this way. Americans don't understand value, but they rush to find and preserve value in a situation they don't even understand. Many, I want to say, I don't know, I haven't seen any scientific studies. I want to say a large percentage of Americans still think that their dollar is connected to gold. And even people who were around during Nixon's shock, when the U.S. dollar was removed from gold, aren't aware that the U.S. dollar is a fiat currency that is backed by the economic health of the accumulated GDP, in that it's not really, there's no tangible, any specific basket of commodities or current or precious metals that the dollar is backed by. They'll say it's a petrodollar. That's not even really accurate, in the sense of our dollar's not backed by oil. If it was backed by oil, it'd be kind of better. Not to say that it should be backed by oil. That's another conversation. Yet I digress. What I'm getting at is you have people who are not willing to do the research to understand the historical trajectory of value from where even the notion of coinage came. Like, people have not studied coinage and the notion of what does a coin even mean? When you have a piece of metal that has been minted, there are certain things that represents, and I'll go quickly into this. One of the things that a coin represents is either some form of a nation or empire, in that usually it'll have a face on it, and usually it's the same face on a certain type of coin. This is not an accident. This is meant to create a semblance of a unified economy from the center of the empire or the capital to the edges. So wherever you can use the coin with the face of Augustus or the face of Alexander the Great, that's still part of the empire. So as soon as you get to a place where they don't accept your coins, you're not in the empire anymore. So this is kind of where, when we go to France, or if I go to Europe, I have to exchange my currency because I'm not in the U.S. empire anymore. That's what that means at its core. So we're at a point where Americans don't even understand what currency means and what it does, in the sense of there are useful mechanisms in it. It concentrates the value system around an understandable and tangible graduated schedule, in that eventually you'll be able to figure out how much a coin will get you in someone's labor. So ultimately, it's easier to use coins and dollars as a means of exchanging products and services than bartering. Bartering sounds good until you actually think about, how am I going to trade my skill for this gallon of gas? Somebody works at a gas station. How do I trade my labor for that gallon of gas? I just need to fill the tank in my car. It's really easy to use coinage and dollars and now credit cards or debit cards. So this is, again, when we're talking about what these currency forms represent, ultimately it represents a shared value system. And this is where it gets really sketchy, because then if you really understand math and you understand value, then you start to understand that the US dollar is not fungible within itself. And what I mean is, it appears to be fungible, but you take a dollar from Indiana and you go to New York and you can't get the same thing. That's the same country. We use the same dollar. We use the same quarters. I realized this when I was a child because when I lived in Indianapolis, sodas were 50 cents. I remember when I went the first time I realized inflation existed, sodas in Atlanta were 75 cents. And in my little 5-year-old head, this clicked. I'm like, why is this same thing more expensive there? And this really bugged me as a 5-year-old. And I started trying to pick apart the currency from the time I was like in kindergarten, not just in the United States, in that I was fortunate enough to travel to France when I was in third grade for the first time. So I started to see the currency exchanges. This was before the franc had been gotten rid of and they transitioned to the euro completely. So I saw what happened when the franc was dissolving from hyperinflation, and then I saw the French economy transition to the euro because I went back a few times. So as an American, I'm seeing a currency evaporate and be replaced in a way that most Americans have never even fathomed. They just make fun of Zimbabwe. They don't fathom that this shit happened in France. The same thing that they make fun of Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwe dollar for hyperinflation, that shit happened in France. That happened in Germany. That happened in all these white countries that people want to hold in high esteem, but they don't have awareness, first off, and they have goldfish memories. So Zimbabwe's hyperinflation is the joke and not France for some reason. Yet I digress. What I'm saying is, you have these people who then start to establish these hierarchies based on theft and information control, so that you keep Americans away from learning math, you keep Americans away from understanding currency, and then you can keep them chasing the next fad, and you have a bunch of people who are 10 years ahead and have stockpiled all of their cryptos, and they're going to just keep telling you what to go to the next one. This is the next one. You go, oh, now it's Dogecoin, now it's Shiba Coin, now it's Elon. So you have these people who, you can do this in any industry. This is not unique to finance. It's not unique to anything related to currency. This happens to everything. The problem is there is a potential decentralizing financial solution, and I'm afraid it's going to get wrapped up in all these pyramid scams.
You know, you said a lot there, and something I think is important, or at least hopefully I'm not compartmentalizing this too much, but you said people don't understand value. What I also kind of, to maybe go along with that, is, you know, I think people don't understand the distinction between value, price, and cost, right? When it comes to labor as well as goods. In America especially, you know, that there's no other place where people don't understand that better than America, and that is unfortunate. You know, the other thing too is, you said you were saw that thing with Coke when you were a 5-year-old. You know, I didn't see that till I was a 35-year-old. So, you know, hats off to you for being 3 decades ahead of me.
Hey, I'm owning that I'm not a normal kid, and this is like, I was reading when I was 2.5, like on my own. Like I learned how to read on my own. There's all these things I realize about myself that I'm owning, because other people have to learn to own these things too. It's not being cocky. It's not like, you know, I'm not thinking higher of myself. Yeah, guess what? I saw inflation as a 5-year-old and nobody had to explain it to me. I figured that shit out by myself and worked hard to deconstruct the colonial aspect of the way that inflation affects our lives and our ability to control our time. I've been working hard my entire life. I didn't fall into this on accident. So that's why I'm owning it. And that's, again, people are afraid to own their work because we have all been made to feel imposter syndrome, so we undersell ourselves. This is part of the system. Imposter syndrome, that's built into it. We've been gaslit into thinking, oh, you're not good enough. You're not that smart. Oh, you're not what you think you are. That's part of this. So then you take the lowest offer. That's part of this system. And I'm here to help people deconstruct that that lifelong traumatizing gaslighting that all has been ingrained in all of us so that we undersell ourselves.
Yeah. Oh man, I know you touched on imposter syndrome a lot earlier in the show, and I mean, gosh, I just think about
My first degrees in psychology. Remember that.
right, and I mean, you know, I just think about Black women in the workplace. That is like the example to me. It seems like the textbook example of imposter syndrome. Um, you could probably speak on a little bit of that, but I think we're seeing so many examples of that in the news today, and even me as a Black male, I cannot fully understand it to the extent any Black woman can, for sure. But I think I have some idea in these news stories where people see it and they're like, "Wow, we never knew this was happening." So. That aside, happy to talk about that a little bit more. But that aside, what I do want to ask you about, you had a chance to talk about fiat currency. But what I want to know is, wait, am I doing this the right way? Is Bitcoin bullshit?
Thank you for posting that or discussing this book, because I like the way that book was written. It was meant to be a conversation with space and time as an open-minded skeptic, and that is exactly why I phrased the book as a question and not a statement, because I went in with that question. I did not have my mind made up, and there are points in the way it's constructed that's going to look like the conclusion was made, but that's because I have retroactive or retrospective analysis in the capacity to edit it. So there are things because I know how there are also because I have a degree in psychology, I know how people are. So I did things like put in TLDRs because I know people are going to skip. They're going to skip straight to the end. And I even wrote for that person, like there's like an address to the person that skips straight to the end. And it's like, there are things like, because I also did those choose your own adventure books when I was a kid, I realized that people aren't going to go through, it's not meant to necessarily be read chronologically, because I know that's not how people absorb information, but also you're going to have to read it at least twice, if not 3 times, to actually get it. And that's not on accident either. I'm not trying to water down the material. It's very dense. It's short, but it's very dense. It's like antimatter in the sense of it's like a black hole as far as how dense. Like, I learned there is rhetorical flourish writing, and then there's academic writing. This book is academic writing with some rhetorical flourishes, in that there are no wasted words. There are times where I use rhetorical flourishes to make sure you stay awake, but most of the book is straight to the point, completely discussing exactly the concept and not wasting any words. And this is something that I think people like when you read something that's academic, it's really dry on purpose, and there are some academic schools that do more flourished writing, but multiple schools I was trained in, it's very dry, very to the point. There are, like, if you can say it in 6 words, you say it in 6 and not 10. These are the things that inform the way I wrote this book. So it's not something like, you can't just sit down and read it. I promise you can't just sit down and read it, because you will not understand it. If you try to digest it all at once, it's too much information. Information overload is a real thing, which is why I understand now, as a martial arts practitioner, why sometimes they only teach you like 3 things in one session. You may be there for an hour, but you're only working on 3 moves, because information overload is a real thing. And in that, this book is going to let you know that when you're asking, is Bitcoin bullshit, you could be meaning 10 different things. And this is the element of, when people ask that question, they don't even know what they're talking about. Are they talking about the financial element? Are they talking about the technology? Are they talking about the community? Are they talking about the decentralization? There are all these. Are they talking about the governance? Are they talking about how much control you have over the protocol? There are all these things that people could be talking about, but they don't know enough about the subject to then be asking that question. And then the way I put it is like, there's a reason people are asking that question, but they don't ask that question about how combustion engines work. They don't ask that question about how disc brakes work. Because the way that the media has hyped this thing, it makes it seem like, oh, you can make a bunch of money if you just learn how Bitcoin works and you just figure out these little numbers. You too can figure out the lottery like everybody else. That all these other people that we're going to highlight at the beginning and show they took out loans and sold their houses and put it in Bitcoin. We're going to talk about them at the beginning, but we're not going to talk about their losses. So we're going to make it seem like you can be these people at their high points all the time and never show you these people at their low points, because guess what? They all hit low points too. You never always win. That's not the way numbers work. That's just not the way statistics work. You can't always win. So when these people who trade make it seem like they're always winning, they're liars. You can't always win.
Right.
That's just not how it works.
Yeah, I think you're 100% on point with that. You know, no one is in crypto Twitter. Well, very few people in crypto Twitter are talking about, oh, I lost 50% of my bag today. You know, nobody's necessarily saying that. And actually, this goes back to a conversation way back, something I took away from one of our conversations that I thought was extremely valuable. And it's very much, you guys, everybody needs to stop what they're doing right now and understand this maxim of cryptocurrency communications out there. The people who talk about projects, the only reason why they talk about projects is because they are invested in those projects. Can you talk a little bit more about that and why we see this?
That's a great segue for me to talk about the research forum. So one of the things that we discussed early on was whether we were going to tokenize the research forum, and we decided, at least for now and probably for the near seeable future, that we're not going to tokenize it, because that inherently creates these conflicts of interest that then are going to make decisions affected by speculator sentiment instead of what actually needs to be the focus of the organization. So this is kind of where there are some things that need to be tokenized or that could benefit from being tokenized, and then there are some things that shouldn't ever be tokenized. And I'm trying to do research to find where that line is and what that scale should be, in that I'm not I'll say this, I'm not 100% against anything. I'm not 100% for anything. And it's really, really difficult to do that when you have a portfolio. Because the problem is, when you have a portfolio, you want whatever's in your portfolio to win. And this becomes the inherent problem of people holding tokens, people getting invested in things, people then betting on a winner. And I think even in that context, the notion of a single winner is paradoxical in a decentralized space. You can't be decentralized if there's a single winner. And even if the network is decentralized itself, if there's a single winner, that's not true decentralization. So our notions of unilateral single winners of the and cornering of the market, that doesn't work in decentralization. That's completely incompatible with the very notion of what decentralization is meant to be. But that's inherently the problem of decentralization, is then you can't get a unified definition of what everybody thinks that decentralization is. So people may be talking about, the network, but then are they talking about the financial channels? Because if you get all of if let's say Bitcoin wins, quote unquote, and every transaction goes on Bitcoin in the entire world, that's not decentralized. I'm sorry, that's not decentralized on any planet. So if we're saying that's the subtitle of my book, actually, The Paradox of a Unilateral Decentralized Cryptocurrency. It's a paradox. That notion, which is why at the core, especially Americans, not so much the rest of the world, some post-colonial places have to reframe their mindsets into the notion of not having a single unilateral winner. That's not decentralized. That's not what this is meant to be.
Well, doesn't that really highlight the irony of Bitcoin maximalists?
Yes, all maximalists in the decentralized space are hypocritical phonies, basically. There's no other way to say it. I'm not gonna cut any corners with that. They're all phonies. If anybody's a maximalist of any kind in the decentralized space, they're a phony, and they're just in it to make money. And that's the worst kind of person to have in this community, in the sense of, like, they are mercenaries. They will sell themselves and the movement out for the highest bid. That is not the kind of person that affects change. And that's kind of where, I have no problem saying that and sticking by that. Maximalists are the worst. I can't stand maximalists, and they're not decentralized. Like, their type of thinking is completely in opposition of decentralization. if I can be direct.
No, that's why I like talking to you, and it's definitely why I wanted to have you on the show, because you have a different point of view than a lot of other people. You've been around for quite some time, and I think you've seen things come and go. And and obviously a lot of this is expressed in your book. But, you said that, and I definitely want to move to discussing the smart contract research forum, but I think it's also a really good opportunity to define what are smart contracts. And certainly you're one of the best people to define this for us. Can you tell our audience what a smart contract is?
And ultimately, this is still being debated, but at the core, a smart contract is meant to be a set of commands and scripts that effectively imply some sort of exchange of goods or caveats that have been met in order to exchange currency, or whether it's a NFT or some sort of token for a good or service. And ultimately, the problem becomes all smart contracts don't necessarily have exchanges of goods, and their automated processes don't necessarily have a buyer and a seller, or someone giving a service and someone receiving a service. And that becomes a problem because in contract law, the way I understand it, because I did a research summary on this, there are implicit contracts when there is a purchase, and when there's a buyer and a seller and a record of the transaction, there is an implicit contract whether they write it out or not. So when you go to the gas station and you use your debit card and you are expecting to get gasoline for X amount of dollars, if one of the sides, like if you get too much gasoline based on some sort of error and they recognize it based on the implied contract and the terms of service by which you use that pump, they may be able to seek damages depending on the terms that were printed on the receipt. And there are things like that where if the person then did not see the terms on the receipt, they may be able to claim that their understanding of the contract was different because they were informed after the transaction. And what ends up happening is, based on contract law, the lowest understood agreed upon terms are what gets legally bound as the contract if there is any conflict. So if there's any sort of conflict in what people on both sides of the agreement think are the terms, then all of the disagreements get thrown out, and those are not part of the unwritten contract, and only the things that are understood are part of it. And what that means is people can raise conflicts arbitrarily, and then it would have to be adjudicated. Now, the point of a smart contract is to be self-executing, quote unquote, and self-enforcing is what has been claimed. Self-enforcing is not possible. You can't enforce. And what I mean by that is, if you and I have a contract, you and I can't enforce the rules. We have to have a third party or the state as the one that's enforcing the contract to actually enforce the damages or ensuring that one or both parties is has their terms of the original contract met. That enforcement comes from agencies, it comes from government, it comes from lawyers, it comes from arbitrators. Smart contracts don't enforce. So the way that the smart contract has been pitched is not actually in line with the way that legal contracts exist or are written. So then what that means is, it's not that we're going to start calling smart contracts something else. It's just that there's going to be a lay interpretation of what smart contracts mean, and then there's going to be the actual interpretation, and the actual interpretation means that most smart contracts are not legal contracts, and they just represent a term that is identified as meaning self-executing code to mediate exchange of some sort. Or some, again, it's like not all smart contracts are for exchanges now, so that's where it's like some action results from a self-executing script or set of scripts being called on to then be for one user at a time, so that, again, it's like multiple users can engage with the smart contract at any given moment, because it's not be held to one node of access. And that's the benefit of a decentralized network. So in theory, millions of people could call upon the same smart contract without experiencing a bottleneck in the same way as trying to think, like if you're on eBay and you're trying to bid at the same time, eventually there's going to hit a limit where if too many people click, the slowest people are not going to count. So it's a matter of latency, and this happened with the stock market as well, in that the closer you get to the central node that's making a decision, the less latency is between the click and the network. And this is why the stock market people were setting up their trading offices as close as possible to the actual stock market servers, because the further you get, the more latency between your trades and the market. Not to get too far away, but again, this is where the notion of what makes something decentralized was put there for a couple of reasons, and people will often make it seem like it was only one reason. Like, yes, there was a financial decentralization aspect, but there's also the information flow decentralization aspect, so that if, like I said, Bitcoin didn't have smart contracts originally, but there was the notion of calling multiple people being able to execute transactions at the same time without congestion happening. And that's ultimately what decentralized networks are meant to do. But when they become too centralized, it stops having that benefit.
Something that you kind of touched on is, there's a lot of these technical terms that do not have legal definitions to them. So when you talked about smart contracts, yes, they are self-executing. No, they are not self-enforcing. And I see a lot of people who take liberty with some of these notions or some of these concepts, and they throw them out there without really understanding them. But to a certain extent, once again, there is no legal definition to some of these terms. So we don't have a centralized understanding of these.
So this is a misconception in that a lot of the way that it's been framed in the blockchain space is as if some of these mechanisms don't have legal counterparts, when in fact they do. So there's things like trespass to chattel that would represent reclaiming property in the same way that a callback on a smart contract would execute. And it's like, because people are not aware of those types of like legal terms, this is where it's only when somebody, I think his name is Joshua Fairfield, who's a lawyer, that put forth a framework for applying the concepts that do exist in law to their counterparts in the blockchain space. And this is one of the things that I did for the forum, in that because it's like a 90-page legal article where it's very, very dry. It's all, not all, but a lot of case law, talking about Uniform Commercial Code, Article 2, 204, the Battle of Forms. That Battle of Forms was what I was talking about earlier, actually. Then there are all these things about the way that these concepts have been framed by people in the blockchain space that haven't done their homework or were never legal specialists in the first place. And in that, the reason Joshua Fairfield's paper was 100 pages long is because he had so many concepts to deconstruct that had been presented by the blockchain space that he then would create counterparts or point at counterparts in the actual legal frameworks for. And I think the issue is you'd really have to be a specialist in sales law. You know, you can't, like, an average lawyer isn't going to know these things necessarily, where, you know, the law is so broad and expansive. Like, you as someone in law probably would have never had to know any of these things to operate, because it's so far outside the realm of what you do that these things don't apply. And this is kind of where I think there has been a lot of rhetoric about law from non-lawyers that has then shaped the development to where we get to a point where we're 10 years in, and because that mantra has been around so long, it's like Joshua Fairfield's body of work is revolutionary in that it deconstructs all of these things that people have been saying and points to examples where it's like, no, actually, this is X, this is Y, this is Z, and these things could all be actually applied in the cases in which the not even decentralized, the maximalist space is saying that there aren't any solutions, because it's 100% the maximalist space that gets along these narratives and tries to frame these things as if they're not solved, so then they can bring a single solution.
Well, I agree. I think maybe where I was going with that statement was going back to someone you mentioned previously, like Musk, right? Who comes along and champions Doge or Bitcoin. Throws around some terms that, you know, resonate with people within the various communities, and all of a sudden they're a darling. I'm not trying to beat up on Musk necessarily, but
I mean, we should, because he's a charlatan. Like, straight up, that dude's a charlatan. He's dangerous. The notion of him being anything but a charlatan is dangerous. So let's beat up on Musk. Because I think people are afraid to, because then they're like, who is this guy? Like, yeah, guess what? I've written not AI, but machine learning programs that write music based on human input. That's a big deal. And this is where Elon would hire somebody like me and then take credit for my work and then be like, oh, yeah, we're doing this with the cars and then the robots we're building. Meanwhile, it's 100 of me's doing all the work, and he's out there taking all the credit, just like the way in the Spider-Man movie, it was a team of people that got pissed at Tony Stark. Yeah, it's the same thing. He's not a single genius guru bringing these ideas. There's 100+ people behind everything that Tesla or SpaceX does, and this dude comes out and takes credit. And then, I don't know if you heard about the steering wheel debacle. He's trying to design cars with no steering wheels, and then the engineering team has to say, oh yeah, we'll do it, and put the steering wheel anyway, because that was a dumb idea. And then nobody's calling him out on these stupid things. So that's what I'm like, yeah, this is a problem as to why you can't not beat up on Musk, because then when people aren't beating up on him, he goes out and, oh, follow Doge, follow this, that. And then when he entered at 44,000, anybody that followed him lost money because they probably didn't understand how to play the market. And then they probably didn't exit at the 60. And this is where there are things about the way he's telling people, oh, I'm buying a a micro house. Bullshit. He's not living in a micro house. I don't buy that. Elon Musk is not living in a 500 square foot home. Bullshit. But he's trying to tell people this, so then they go buy the 500-foot home for $30,000, something stupid. Because this is the problem with fabricating these tech geniuses that are really 100 of me's. I can't do that shit by myself either. That's why I work on a team. You know what I mean? Teams are what build things, not individuals. So this notion of this individual guru needs to be deconstructed. It's dangerous. It's super dangerous.
Yeah, I definitely agree. That's why I bring it up. And, you know, it's to a certain extent, it's damaging to the industry, certainly damaging to the investors and or at least supporters, maybe not investors, to the tune that you just elaborated upon. So, you know, I feel like, you know, this is just my opinion. I'm certainly not trying to, you know, say that Musk is a criminal or, you know, he's violating the law or anything like that. But I do think there's some lack of judgment on his part, in my opinion, as well as some lack of judgment in people who are following him in. I mean, it's just like Jamie Dimon, just like Warren Buffett, you know, how they poo-poo Bitcoin loudly at first, but behind the scenes, quietly, they're finding ways to onboard.
So did you see the robot, though? I mean, the dancing robot, and I say that very loosely. That was actually just a dude in a costume.
Oh, no, I didn't.
So this is where, when you're like, he's not a criminal, like, yeah, he is. He's saying they're going to release a Tesla bot next year, which they're definitely not. As someone who's worked in machine learning, I can say 100% equivocally, they're definitely not going to be done with that definitely not next year. And then the way that they presented it, as like it was meant to be a joke in real time, but the way the media presented it, they made it seem at first as if the person in the costume was a real robot, and the Tesla stock went up. So this dude just manipulated Tesla stock by bringing out a person in a robot costume saying we're building robots. Yeah, he's a criminal. I'm not afraid to say it. When we get to a certain point, when he did that what's it called? Funding secured at 420, that's very, very borderline criminal. SEC investigated. They're like, okay, not quite. This isn't quite criminal. But now, what he is doing with this robot claim and the way that the Tesla stock was affected, he is a criminal, because they are 100% not going to be able to do that. And the problem is, nobody in the SEC knows any different. They just have to take his word for it, because none of them understand how machine learning works. None of them understand how servos work or how engineering works, to be able to call him on his bullshit. And that's the problem with having those dumb people in positions of authority, whether on enforcement, because then you get Elizabeth Holmes claiming for 10 years that they've got this blood tester that can do things that science claims this should be impossible. Well, guess what? It was impossible, but nobody was able to call her on it for 10 years. So this woman's able to become $1 billion unicorn company because she's white and she's able to just carry confidence. She doesn't have that imposter syndrome. She didn't have that imposter syndrome that you and I were told to have. So this lady built $1 billion company off lies and hot air and some fake numbers. And the U.S. government only caught it eventually because I don't even know how, like, I think they just got lucky. It wasn't like, I think she just got too high on her own ego, and that's the only reason she got caught. Elon is the same person. People people just haven't built enough things like I have to be able to see it and call him on it, because he's the emperor with no clothes right now. And only a few people can see that he's not wearing clothes, because the clothes he's telling people he's wearing are like, it's like the way that he's doing it, he's got the media telling everybody else too. So he's not just telling everybody, I've got these robes. The media's telling you he's got these robes. The stock market's telling you he's got these robes. Jim Cramer on MSNBC or whatever channel, he's bullshitting telling you he got these robes. So it's not just Elon. And that's the problem, is the emperor has no clothes. That's really relevant right now. But they didn't have media when that story was written in the same way that we do now. And then you realize, like, oh, I guess they had the lute player. The lute player standing there acting like the emperor ain't naked is going to make you think, I guess I'm not supposed to see it either. And right now, Elon is standing there butt-ass naked in front of everybody, saying he's going to build this robot that's going to make... I'll give it to him. He's at least saying universal basic income is necessary, which it is. But the way that his charlatan existence has been hyped is very dangerous. And that's where I'm like, all I'm saying are facts. All these things I just said, they may be tinged with my opinion, but just go look them up. And even down to, yeah, he's being investigated right now for all of the deaths with Tesla that's not being talked about in American media. Go look at the British media. You don't see that in American media, because that would affect the Tesla prices. Where I'm like, how is Tesla stock going up when they're being investigated for auto drive related deaths right now? Because the media is just, again, Americans are not good at discerning what is a distraction, what is a smokescreen, and where the reality in things are. And that's where I'm like, I'm American myself, and I just got lucky in that I was taken back and forth. Like the way that they'll say there's the Great China Firewall, we got the same thing. It's just, I don't know, Uncle Sam's curtain, whatever you want to call it. We have a veil of information around the way we see things. And then we get these wannabe pharaohs like Elon and Bezos telling, like, the fact that we have these two people in a space race and the media is just like okay with it, that's a sign that we have cheerleaders who don't critically assess. There's no reason these two dudes should have replaced